All right, guys. Hey, another video for you today as we're going through the Cornerstones book. So here we are. This is the next one on this. This is question 15. How does Jesus perfectly fulfill the office of king? So once again, how does Jesus perfectly fulfill the office of king? So if you've tracked with the previous video on Cornerstones from last week, we talked about that Jesus fulfills the office of priest, prophet, king. Okay, so now we're going to dig into the king piece. Okay, so how do we think about the kingship of Jesus? Why all of that? So there's a lot. Like if you get the parent guide and you go through it, there's some stuff to think about. But I thought I'd just go a little bit deeper, a little bit more of a discussion on this that might be helpful or way to think. Because every time I make these videos, I always try to like run them through with my kids, and you know they're young, so I try to kind of figure out. Some of them are kind of hard to do, some of them are okay, but you know, so I try to figure out a better way to talk about it based on what I see there. Okay, so here's the answer that we see. Jesus perfectly reigns over his people as King of Kings, and that is how does he fulfill the office of King? Okay. Of king. Now that answer in and of itself is not very helpful, right? How does he perfectly fulfill? Well, he perfectly reigns. Okay, that's fine and dandy, but I guess what I want to do is dig a little bit deeper with our church people about what does it actually mean? Why is Jesus a king? Why is that even significant? How do we know that he is king? So those are the kind of things I want to talk about. I was going to look in here and just to see of if there's anything else that I wanted to throw at you from the book. But yeah, it doesn't really give you much this time on the kingship. So let's start with this. What I would do is if I would talk about Jesus being king, I would first want to talk to you guys think about all the kings that you know just from the Bible. And not necessarily the ones that are from Israel, but just think of kings, right? So, in our family, we talked about, one of the kids brought up Nebuchadnezzar, another one, Solomon, Saul, David, all of that, right? In fact, you'll find at least the last three I just mentioned in the Cornerstones book. And I do think it's important to recognize when we talk about this subject, really, a couple aspects of this conversation. First is we need to talk about the fact that that all kings that you can think of from the Bible, they all failed. No king actually succeeded in being a complete and perfect ruler. Now, there are some exceptions to this in the sense that when you think of the Old Testament mindset, David is the model. Now, we know that while David is the model, he's also has a major stain on his record, which is with Bathsheba, and there's some things towards the end of 2 Samuel that, yeah, you look, David's messed up. But while David is the model, though, as somebody whose heart was after God, David still ended well. But he had he wasn't the perfect king, but he was pretty good. There's really only two other guys when you begin to think about who both Kings and the book of Chronicles will talk about them in a positive light. Hezekiah and Josiah, right? Those are really the only two that because Kings usually provides really the negative view about the kings. Chronicles usually will try to highlight something positive about the kings. Kings is writing about how here's why we're in the mess that we're in, and Chronicles is kind of like, we already know we've messed up, so let me just talk about what God was doing still, right? So Hezekiah, Josiah, but still, even the prophets, David is the model. David is the model. So that's the first thing, is Jesus perfectly reigns, right? Because Jesus finished well. Jesus reigns and was perfect, is perfect, and will reign and be the king that you and I desire, one that is not flawed. Jesus is flawless, okay? There's another reason of why we need to talk about Jesus as king. And this comes from, and you'll see, for instance, why it's important. Like if you read the genealogies, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, this an account of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. Okay? It was important for the gospel writers to speak about Jesus being a son of David. Here's why. Okay? And in fact, as you read Matthew, it's important to trace that line of David ending up with Jesus. Here's why. If you go all the way back to the story of Deuteronomy chapter 18, God tells the people of Israel, you're going to want a king one day. If you're going to have a king, here's what he should do. Here's what he shouldn't do. That's important, right? You give them what they should be doing, and then what you see is essentially Solomon blows all of that up. Go back even earlier to that. Look at Genesis 49. Genesis 49 is fascinating. It's one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible because it's the promises that Jacob is making. It's the prophecy he's praying over his children. And he talks to Judah, and he says in verse 10 that pretty much all kingship will belong to Judah, and but there's one who's coming that all kingship belongs to. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. Now that's important, right? Because what we're seeing as early as the first book of the Bible, this kingship, somebody is coming down the line who all kingship belongs to. You'll see that talked about in Numbers chapter 24 of this incredible king who's coming, who will rule over and trample. A star shall rise from Jacob. You see these pieces. Now that's important, right? Because now you get fast forward and you get to the book of Samuel. There's been no kings yet. Moses was king-like. He wasn't really a king, but he was king-like. But you get to Samuel, and now the people are finally doing what God said they were going to do in Deuteronomy, which is they're wanting a king, talking about, well, we need a king. Samuel tells them, like, look, what you're asking for is something very other than what God could be for you. And they're like, oh, it's okay. We want a guy to fight our battles. We want somebody to be, the guy who looks like a king, smells like a king, acts like a king. And so God says, okay, give him Saul. We'll give him Saul. And Saul looked apart, but Saul was not. His heart was not dedicated to God. Then comes David. God selects David as this little boy, insignificant, brings him in. 2 Samuel chapter 7 is the key to all of this, though. And David is looking, he's seen everything God's done for him, and he says, how can I live in this palace when the Ark of the Covenant's in this tent? And he said, I'm going to build a kingdom. I'm going to build a temple for God. And so then God stops him, and he says, look, you're not building me anything. Don't worry about that. But I'm going to build something for you. And then fascinating what he says is he tells him, and I'll make sure I quote for accuracy here in my text. If you look at 2 Samuel 7, he goes on and he says these last few things right here. He says, I will raise up after you a descendant who will come from your body. I will establish his kingdom. That's verse 12. He is the one who will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Okay? Now, Chronicles will go and even make this a little bit more specific. But from that point on, 2 Samuel 7, from that point on, everybody is looking towards who this individual come, because it seems like what God has done for David right there is tie in Genesis 49, 2 Samuel 7, that the line of David is through which this ultimate king will come. And so, yeah, the prophets will trace him out. They'll talk about looking for the root of Jesse, the son of David. Talk about David, that somebody like David is coming, right? And we find that's why it's so important, right? That we see here is we find that fulfillment in Jesus. Jesus is the son of David. He is the fulfillment of this kingly line. Now, a couple other little things to note, too, just as we talk about the kingship of Jesus, that not only is Jesus the fulfillment and he's king of Israel. In fact, as if you guys have been going through the eggs that our Palm Pals ministry put out, we had one of the readings last night talking about what Pilate put on the top of the cross. And so that's key. King of the Jews. He's king over it. But what God envisioned and what God had told the people for What was envisioned in that passage was somebody who's going to be much larger and much more of a powerful king than just king over a geographical region of Israel. And you'll see things like Jesus will affirm this in John 18. My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. You are a king then, Pilate asked. You say that I'm a king, Jesus replied. I was born for this. I've come to the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who's of the truth listens to my voice. So Jesus makes it very clear, right? My kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom is much grander, much greater than just simply Israel. Sure, he is Messiah. He is ruler over he's the one who comes from the line of David. But even the prophets and those passages imagine somebody who is not just landlocked into a tiny little space, but his kingdom is over everything. And then you begin to understand as you start to put John together and Colossians, they talk about that he created everything. It's all there for him. So Jesus is the perfect king because he is the one we've all been waiting for. Jesus is the perfect king because he's flawless. But then also you have one as he's king over all things. And you'll see this little reference right here. I love what it says about Jesus in Revelation 19:16. He has a name written on his robe and on his thigh. King of kings, Lord of lords. King over all kings, Lord over all lords. His dominion is everywhere. If you read, remember Daniel chapter 7, talking about the Son of Man coming and being handed over all kingdom, all the world is to him. That is who we look to. And so when we talk about Jesus being the perfect king, it's important that we recognize that, yes, he is king. He is king over everything. He is the fulfillment, the messianic one that we wait for, who came from the Old Testament, who was talked about in the Old Testament coming. But he rules much more than just a land. He rules the world. He rules the universe. And there's some implications for that, church people. I want you to think about this too. So not only is the answer right that we see is that he is the perfect. He perfectly reigns over his people as King of Kings. But the implications of that is if he is king, he tells us what to do. If he is king, since he is king, he is in charge of us. We live in a time now where, we depending on what authority we respect, we obey. So some now, they want to, depending on what comes down from the government, to mask up, to not mask up, all of that. And depending on your relationship to that authority, you do or do not, right? If Jesus is king over the universe, there is no debate. There's no questioning. There's no, I don't like that, I'm going to do my other thing. For the Christian, it's everything he's asked us to do, we do because he's truly king. There is no higher authority. There is no question. You either accept his authority or you accept something else, somebody else's. And that's somebody, as we just got done through our temptations of Jesus, who has the kingdoms of this world in his hand currently, but he's not really the true owner of them. He's a counterfeit. All right. I hope this helps. I hope this is some good discussion. I think if you're teaching this for your kids at home, or if you're just doing this by yourself, just think about all the kings and think about every single one of them, how they all end. Jesus is the only one who comes, who will not let you down because he is the perfect king. All right. Talk to you later. See ya. Bye-bye.